Welcome to this sew along. So I'm going to sew this shirt and happy that you guys are sewing along with me. So the first thing I've done is I have checked my thread color. So we're in quarantine right now, so this is probably not the ideal thread that I would choose, but it's good enough for now. So I've just checked my tension, and I actually changed my serger thread, which is amazing. I don't do that kind of thing usually. And I've checked the tension on that, so that's good to go. I've cut out all my pieces. I have my fronts here. And I've done all my interfacing as well. This is the long sleeved version. When it would be time to do the short sleeve version, I'll just give you a cue to hop on over. There's a different sleeve band video that you can watch to help you with the sleeve band for that. The other thing I've cut out is just a very long strip. It's about 1.5 inches wide, and it's just long. This is what I'm going to use for the sleeve placket, and I'll show you how to sew that in a minute. Yep, so that's there. My collar, I've interfaced my collar pretty messily, you can see. In places I have made the interfacing smaller, a little bit smaller, just to reduce bulk, but I haven't worried too much about that. I've got my sleeve pieces. The sleeves have a place to cut a slit, which is where we'll do the placket, and that'll be pretty early on in the process. My cuffs, my front facings, which are interfaced as well. I'll deal with those. But the first thing we're going to look at is we're going to work on the yokes, the back yokes, and the back panel. So this is my back piece here. You can see there are some notches on this top edge right here. So this is the fold, and the notches are here. So the first thing we're going to do is actually sew down from these notches, matching the notches down, I don't know, a couple of inches, and back tack in both directions. That's just going to set that inverted pleat for us. So that's what I'm going to do, and I'll be back. Right, so I sewed that down. It's just a little shy of 2 inches. This is linen, so I don't actually need to clip this, but if you wanted to, you could just put a little notch in, just like that, in where that fold line is. Now, when I open it up like this, I want to just fold that inverted pleat so that there's an even amount on each side. So I'm going to take that notch that I cut, and that's going to match up with that stitching line here. So I'm going to pop a couple of pins in there. Okay, this fabric's a pure linen, so it's like finger pressing really nicely. So you could press that down if it's not sitting so flat. I would also recommend running a line of stay stitching along here, just a 1/4 inch or 1/2 centimeter from that edge, just to hold that down, so that when you sew the next row with the yoke, you are not going to accidentally, sew it under. Okay, now I'm going to take my yoke piece. So one of my yoke pieces, and I'm going to mark this. Oops, sorry. This is the neckline here, and then I'm going to mark the position of that fold right here, and then I'm going to put right sides together and pin it into place, matching that notch to that center of that inverted pleat. Pin that all the way along. You'll notice that there is a little bit of a curve in that lower pattern piece that you'll have to match. That's there because our backs aren't totally flat and straight. So you might need to ease that in a little bit. So what I would recommend doing is pinning this yoke on. Okay, that's pinned on. And then I'm going to go and I'm going to sew that on, just this single layer for now. So I sewed that yoke seam with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. I'm going to open it out like this just to check. You can see that I've got my nice inverted pleat here. And I flip that back down again. And I'm going to turn the whole thing over. So the back panel is going to be facing up. Now I'm going to take my second yoke piece and I'm going to put that wrong side down on top of the lower back piece. So basically what I'm doing is I'm sandwiching the back piece in between the two yokes. Again, I'm matching that center point with the center in the shirt, and I'm going to pin it on. So what that will do is it will enclose that seam. Oops, I'm pinning from the wrong side. I'm going to flip it over. I'm actually going to pin from the side that I just sewed because we're going to use that stitching line as a guide. So I'm now going to sew again, basically the same seam line, but I'm going to be attaching that inner yoke piece. So I'm going to sew right on top of that first stitching line. Right, so I can flip this yoke up and you can see that we've got that seam enclosed. So this is the outside of the garment and then this is the inside, so we'll have a clean finish there. I'm going to press this and then I think I'm going to pin stitch along this edge. I'm going to have a look at it once it's pressed and make a decision about whether I want to do that or not. So I actually made the decision not to pin stitch that, partially because my thread doesn't match super well. So this is the right side of the back. We can tell because that's the one that's got the inverted pleat. You could certainly do it with the I don't know, box pleat on the outside. Okay, so this is the right side up, and then I'm going to take the right side of my front piece and place it right sides together. So right sides together, and then I'm going to pin this front piece, but I'm only going to pin it to the yoke piece that is on the outside. So this yoke that's going to be on the inside of the shirt, I'm not going to pin it to that now. We're going to look after that later. So we're going to attach it at the shoulder seams, right sides together, outer yoke piece to the front piece only. We're going to leave that other yoke free. I'm going to sew that with a 1/2 inch seam allowance on both sides. Okay, so I've got it laid out with right sides facing up now. And now we're going to enclose that seam. So we're going to use the burrito method. So we're going to carefully roll up this back piece. And we're going to roll up the front pieces as well to make our burrito. There's different ways of doing this. This is the way that a lot of people find easier. Sometimes if I'm sewing for myself, I don't actually do it this way, but this is the way I'm going to show you. Okay, so you've got that rolled up. This is that inner yoke piece. We're going to take this inner yoke piece here and we're going to wrap it around that rolled up back and front and use it to enclose it in a burrito. So that's my rolled up back and front in there. And basically, The back and front are rolled up in a Yoke burrito. So it's like the yolks, the tortilla, and they're holding the burrito together. Okay. Pinning from the wrong side again. So again, we're going to use that same stitching line as our guide. Okay. Just going to pop one more pin in there. And then I'll show you on the other side. Okay, so we've rolled up our front and our back. This is that yoke piece. I'm going to flip it underneath and around. So it's enclosing the front and back rolled up pieces in our burrito. Right, so I'm going to go and again follow that stitching line and sew the yolks together. Right, so I've got my burrito here, and now what I need to do is carefully turn it inside out, or the right way out. So I'm going to just carefully open that burrito, turning, pulling the front and the back out. Try not to yank it too hard. We haven't stay stitched our neckline or anything, and we don't want to stretch that out. Okay, there we go. It's like magic. So here's the yoke and the fronts. You can see that that all the seams are enclosed in there. Now, this is very, very fine fabric, but you could go and you could have graded that before you flipped it. I probably should have done that, but I didn't. I don't actually need to, and this is really fine. So again, you can press this and then pin stitch or top stitch along this seam line if you would like to. We're going to move on to the sleeves next. So I have my two sleeves here. I like to lay them out so that there's a right and a left. So see how they're like mirror images of each other? I'm just going to work with one for the time being. So we have this slit that we've cut in here. So we're going to make what is called a continuous lap placket. So I've got my right side facing up. I'm going to take my long strip and I'm going to put it behind there. I'm going to pin it. I actually don't usually pin it when I do it normally, but I'll pin it to show you. I'm going to give myself a little bit of extra. A little bit of extra is always easy. So what we're going to do is we're going to sew a 1 centimeter, or I guess 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. So you can see I'm kind of opening this up. Now, of course, it's a V, so it's not going to open up completely flat, and we don't want it to. So what we're going to do is we're going to sew a 1 centimeter seam allowance, and it's going to maintain that 1 centimeter seam allowance all the way down here on the strip, but it's actually going to be reduced to like nothing here at this point where that apex is. So the aim is to sew along here, keeping that 1 centimeter seam allowance steady until we get to this point here where we only want to just catch a few threads of that and then go back again to our 1 centimeter. So I'm going to sew 1 centimeter along here. So I'm basically going to sew straight, but it's actually the shirt cuff that's not good. The shirt, sorry, placket opening that is not going to be straight. That's going to stay at an angle. So I just wanted to show you exactly how I do that. I've started off at 1 centimeter, and then this edge of the strip I'm going to keep straight, but the actual sleeve is going to be an angle. So I've kind of eyeballed it where I think this is going to be 1 centimeter here. I could use a seam gauge. I've started it off, I've back tacked. When I get to that point, I'm going to stop with my needle down. I'm just going to lift my presser foot up just to release the folds. Put it down again, and you can see it's kind of automatically realigned itself. So it's all nice and smooth, so I'm just maintaining that 1 centimeter seam allowance. There we go. It's important that I don't have any tucks or anything at this point. Now, you can go ahead and iron this. This is linen, and it just doesn't need really to be pressed. It works really well with finger pressing, so I'm just finger pressing that all the seam allowances into towards the strip, and then I'm going to go, and I'm going to press this with my iron. I'm going to press it over about 1/4 of an inch, and then over again, so it just covers that that stitching line. Right, so I have pressed that over. To be honest, I actually haven't finalized this pattern. I might give you a little bit of a wider strip on this, but that's okay. It's the same principle. So I just trimmed back these seam allowances a little bit, and now I'm going to fold this placket piece over so it just covers that stitching line. I like to leave a little extra fabric on this end so I can hold on to something. I'm going to pop it under the presser foot, and I'm going to top stitch it. So I'm just holding that down, just so it's just covering. It's especially important at this apex that that you're only just covering it. I don't know how many times I can say just covering, but yes, just covering it, not overlapping it by a lot. Again, when I get to that apex, I'm going to stop with my presser foot down. Just lift it up just to release the fabric, and line it up again. So just covering that stitching line, and then pin stitch the rest of the way. Okay, it's not perfect. I would prefer this to be like an equal distance along. I'm going to do it again, but you can see how that really neatly finishes off our placket. The back side is finished as well. So we'll fold it over like this. I'll show you that in a minute, but it's just a really neat way to do a placket. No tucks down here at that apex line. It's kind of magical. It's basically my favorite way to finish a placket. You know what? We're not going to see this little bit where the seam out, where the stitching's a little bit far away, because it's going to be hidden, so maybe I won't. I'm going to do the other one now, and then I'll show you what we'll do with the rest of the sleeve. Okay, I went and I pressed that, so the side that is got not as much towards it is going to be the bottom, and so we press that and keep it flat. And then on the side that has more sleeve to it, we press that under. So you can see that's a really nice finish. I'm just going to go ahead and lock that into place. So just folding this back, you can see we've got this little bit of placket right here. I'm just going to sew just at a 45-degree angle across here, just to stop it from kind of opening up in the wash. Just a 45-degree angle there, just to hold it in place. I'm going to do that on the other side and then take you back to the table. Right, so the last step on the sleeves for the time being, actually that's not true at all. It's a step that we're going to do. Anyway, there's 2 notches on that sleeve, and so this is that shorter side, this is that longer side. So we're going to, these are our pleat notches. So we're going to take this upper notch and we're going to pinch it and lay it so that this pleat notch sits exactly on top of the other pleat notch. Pop a couple of pins in. Okay, so everything's kind of going in this direction. The pleat's going in the same direction that the placket is going, just as a guideline for you. I'll show you on the other side. Always make sure you're doing a right and a left. Trust me, it's happened before that I have not done that. So I've got my notch here, my notch here. I'm just going to take this, pinch it right at that notch, lay it on top of the other notch. And pin. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to stay stitch this down. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to finish these edges, these long edges of the sleeves, just the like underarm seam. I'm going to finish those separately, and since I'll be at the overlocker anyway, I'm going to also finish, these are my front facings, I'm also going to finish this longer edge, the outside edge of both of those front facings. Right, so I've stay stitched the pleat in, and I also stay stitched that placket in the right direction. So many threads. Okay. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to sew most of the sleeve seam. So that's kind of a bit weird, but anyway, that's what we're going to do. So right sides together, I'm folding over itself. Here's the trick. I'm going to start sewing a 1/2 inch from the end. So I'm not going to sew this part. I'm going to start sewing here, and then I'm going to sew a 1/2 inch seam allowance the rest of the way down the sleeve, and then I'm going to press the seam open. Okay, I'm going to do that on both sleeves. Okay, so here's where things get a little bit weird. If you have sewn the Torrens box top from Munna and Broad, then you know this weird sleeve application procedure. If you haven't, that's cool too. I'm going to show you, but it is strange, but bear with me. There is method behind the madness. So basically, the reason that I like to do this totally weird sleeve application that I kind of made up is so that it gives us a lot of latitude with our sleeve and our sleeve head. So there is basically no arm side. It's basically a straight side seam you'll see. And what that means is if you want to ever narrow or widen the sleeve, you don't have to play around with that stupid armhole, because nobody likes to do that. It's a real pain and it causes problems. So, this is what we're going to do about it. So the first thing is I've got my sleeve right side out. The sleeve placket is facing up. So because it's facing up towards me, I know that this is the back of the sleeve. And so the front of the sleeve is right sides together against the front of the shirt. There is a little notch here, and that notch is going to match with this seam here. And because we didn't sew that underarm seam all the way, we can just match that notch to the underarm seam. And of course I can't do it because I'm holding it weirdly. Here we go. Okay. So I'm matching this notch to this seam. There is another notch here. This notch matches this seam junction here on the shoulder. Actually, it's a bit forward of the shoulder, but where that yoke is, so I can pop a pin in there. Okay, so you shouldn't really need to ease it too much, but you might have a little bit of ease because the sleeve head might have stretched a little bit. So we're just going to pin from that first pin that you put in, pin happily along here. Okay, so I've pinned the front of the sleeve to the front of the shirt. Now I'm just going to continue pinning the sleeve to the shirt, but the sleeve is round and the shirt is flat. So it's going to pull it around as I do that. So I'm just going to keep pinning. I'm going to flip that front over on top of the back now. Okay, there's the other notch on the back here. We're going to match that to this notch. So to the seam here. Okay, just making sure there's really no ease in it at all. There we go. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to sew, and I'm going to sew kind of in a circle. So I'm going to start sewing here, right in that apex. It's 1/2 inch from the edge. So I'm going to sew a 1/2 inch seam allowance all the way around here, and I'll kind of be moving my fabric like in a circle as I do that. And I'm going to finish up basically where I started, but it's going to be on the front, if that makes sense. So I'm just going to sew around in a circle and with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. I'm now going to finish the side seams, and it will also finish the armhole seam at the same time. I'm going to use the serger. You can use a zigzag stitch, it's fine. So I've got my front or my back, it doesn't matter. My right side's up. This is where the side seam curves out and becomes the facing for the slits. So I'm just going to start serging along there. Okay, and you can see I have come to the point where there is sleeve. Now, please, please, please do not serge all of these together because you won't be able to put your arm in the armhole. So we need to fold back either the front or the back out of the way to expose just one side of the sleeve and the like armhole, basically one side of the armhole. I'm just going to fold it out of the way as I go over past this part. Okay, I'm coming back around to the other underarm part, just making sure everything's flat. You really, it's quite easy to get this tucked up underneath here, and then that's pretty disastrous because you could chop a hole. So getting there, folding this other side of the sleeve out of the way. that serged the side seams and the armhole, I'm going to do that on the other side as well. Okay, I have overlocked all around there. Now I just need to finish sewing the side seam. I'm going to start sewing it exactly where I finished sewing this underarms, this whatever, sleeve seam, I guess, I don't know what you call it. Anyway, that weird seam that we sewed. Now down here you have a couple of drill holes that you made. So you made a drill hole, or you marked it somehow. I've used drill holes. That is where we are going to stop. So I'm just matching them up there. So that's where we're going to stop. Now, just going to pin in where you'll sew. So you'll sew a 1/2 inch seam. Fine, 1/2 inch seam. And then you'll continue sewing straight down to this drill hole. So at this point, it won't be a 1/2 inch seam, it'll be a, I don't know what it is, something. So you'll just keep sewing straight down here, all the way to the drill holes, and back tack, and then we'll deal with the collar. Right, I have my collar pieces, so I'm just going to put them, so this is the one that'll be uppermost, and I've interfaced that. I'm just going to put them on top of each other, right sides together. This is a very, very slinky linen. Anyway, I'm going to sew around 3 sides of the collar. So I'm gonna, with a 1 centimeter seam allowance. So the side that has the little notches on it, that's the side that's going onto the neck. I am not going to sew that together. So 1 centimeter seam allowance around 3 sides. We're going to do that, clip it, turn it, pin stitch it, top stitch it, whatever you'd like to do. Give it a really good press. No need to finish any edges. Now I'll show you how I clip it actually. So I'll be back in a sec after I sew it. Right, so I have sewn it, those 3 sides. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to grade the seams. So what that means is I always do it actually on the side that is going to be lowermost, just so I don't get a bump on the right side. So I'm just going to basically trim away like 1 layer only. So I've only trimmed away this layer. Just trimmed it closer to that stitching line, not right on top of it. Here's a corner. This is how I do corners. So firstly, I clip off at an angle, clip off that diagonal, making sure I'm not clipping through the seam allowance. The looser the weave, the further away from that corner point I do. And then I do some, I don't know what you call that. I clip it further. More of an angle, like this. Okay? Then any kind of concave curve, you can just do snips into. So again, just being careful not to snip through that stitching line. Okay, so we're going to turn it. The way I like to turn things, it's a bit weird. It's a bit specific. You don't have to do this. Just turn it through. But I think this works really well. So I'll just show you. So I put my thumb inside here, and then I get my finger, and I use my finger to separate these two pieces. Get my thumb right into the corner there, and I have my finger kind of, I guess, pressing the seam open almost, and then I hold that seam open while I flip, and it, I don't know, it just helps it turn really well. Then you'll get something, I'm gonna go to hell for this, but that's okay. I use scissors most of the time to gently push out my corner. You shouldn't do this. You shouldn't use scissors, but I do. Screwdrivers are also handy. I'm gonna do the other side. I guess if you had a point turner, you could use that, but I've never owned one. Okay, holding it there. I think the reason that doing this is okay for me is because I'm doing it really, really gently. Like, you don't want to like push it through really hard because you'll make a hole. And if you've clipped too closely to that corner, you will make a hole. So buyer beware. Okay, I'm going to press the collar. So firstly, I'm going to press it open like this, press the seam flat like that, and then press it like this, and then top stitch or pin stitch if you want to do that. Right, so here we are at the front. So this is the right side out, and I've got my collar piece here, and I want the interfaced side to be the one that's facing the world, okay? So this is a different collar application to most collar applications. It's a pretty standard one for, like, it's a half facing collar application. So you'll find there's a notch in the neckline here. That notch is your center front. Now, your center front, you want your collar edge to match at the center front where the seam allowance is, like where the stitching line is. So that means we have a 1 centimeter seam allowance around the neckline. So that means 1 centimeter in from the edge. I want this edge of the collar to match with that notch. Okay? The other notch I'm going to match is this notch here is going to match with that shoulder seam. And then I'm just going to ease it in because the collar is basically straight. The neckline is basically not straight. I'm sewing both, at this point, I'm sewing both layers of the collar down. Okay. Now, at this point, you could stay stitch that down. I'm not going to. I'm going to do it all in one, but feel free to do that. I'm going to take my front facing, and I'm going to put that right sides together here. So I'm going to match it up. Oops, I lost my pin there. Okay, I'm going to match these corners up. It's a 1 centimeter seam allowance all the way around this facing. So what I like to do is lay the facing down, hold all the layers, take this pin out, and do a switcheroo there. So matching it, holding it. That way I've got all the pins I need. You can put more pins. We could put a pin here. That would be a helpful pin. I'm going to put a bunch of pins to show you. Okay. Now, when we get to this notch here, we're not going to leave this flapping over here. We are going to fold this back. It's going to be about a 1/2 inch. We're going to fold it back just like that. If you have a little peak underneath, that will line up with that yoke seam. So we're just going to fold that back 1/2 inch, do our little switcheroo. There, okay, that's good to go. Okay, we're going to sew all the way down the center front as well. That didn't cut very straight, or rather, I didn't cut that very straight, but hopefully yours will be straighter than that. This has a 2-inch hem on it. So, lay your tape measure at 2 inches. Now, if you had, hopefully yours will be a bit straighter than mine. This is really kind of slinky, weirdly slinky fabric. So, you want to sew across here at the 2-inch point. Okay. So we're going to sew across this little bit of the facing, up the front with a 1 centimeter seam allowance, and around this first part of the neck curve with a 1 centimeter seam allowance. So we're going to sew all of that, clip the corner, flip it through and understitch. Right, so I sewed that seam there and I understitched. I started my understitching a fair ways down from the corner. So how far? About 5 inches down from the corner. That's because this shirt can be worn with the top button open and you don't want to see the understitching. Right, so need to do some more corner turning. So same procedure as the collar. And then we're going to clip just this part. We're going to grate it as well. So there's lots of layers here. So I'm now flipping to not the non-facing side, I suppose. You can clip some of this away. Actually, you know what? I think I'm going to grade some of this off. So I've just got the top layer with the interfacing. In an ideal world, the grading is like a series of steps. Like if you have 4 layers, you'd have 4 separate like steps of where they ended. So I've got about 3. Anyway, that'll do. I'm going to turn this corner through and I'll show you. It's looking like a collar, isn't it? So I'm going to do my dangerous scissor poking again. Got that nice sharp corner. Okay. So here's where things get a little bit interesting. We've sewn the kind of front parts of the collars on, but this back part is still not attached. So what we need to do is sew just the inner layer. Just the inner layer to the yokes. So the interface bit of collar I'm gonna pull out of the way and I'm gonna start pinning back here. Now I wanna start my row of stitching right where this one finishes. You can see where it is actually because my thread doesn't match very well. So I'm going to start it here. So I'm pinning the undercollar essentially to the two back yokes, both the layers of the back yoke. Okay, so I'm going to sew that together with a 1 centimeter seam allowance. All right, so here we are. I've sewn this together. I'm going to grade some of this bulk out. Okay, now what I'm going to do, you have to be really careful when you do this, is I'm going to do some clipping around this curve. Be really careful you're not clipping anything you shouldn't. So make sure you're only clipping these layers that you just sewed. Right. Oops. Okay, let's go from this side. So I've got this flipped here. You can see that when I push this facing down, let me arrange it a little bit better for you. Okay. So I've turned this facing. You can see that underneath the facing, the seam allowances want to go down. Obviously that's not going to work because we don't want them to go down at this point. We want everything to go up inside. So we need to give a really good clip into this shoulder seam. Right on the seam. I'm also going to cut out some of that bulk. It's better. Okay. So because of that clip, I can flip these parts of the seam allowance up into the collar. Right? Pretty good, eh? Need to cut a little bit more out here. There we go. So I'm going to press all of this up. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to press this part of the collar over. Okay, just like that. So I'm going to do that at the ironing board and then I'll come show you. So I've pressed all of these layers up into the collar. So now I'm going to just fold that seam allowance of the upper collar just over, so it just covers that stitching line. You want to make sure you don't pull this upper collar too tight. If you pull it too tightly, it will actually roll up weirdly. You can actually even give it a little bit extra on the top layer to encourage it to roll over. Okay, you can see also, this is the bit of the facing that we folded over. That should just match pretty well with that shoulder seam. Now, in an industrial setting, what you would do is you would top stitch that down and then all the way along the collar. Or you could just do the collar and then top stitch, like pin stitch this down so that it falls right in the ditch of that shoulder seam. It'll be hidden by the collar anyway, so you won't really see it. But you know, I haven't really done any top stitching on this shirt, so I'm actually going to hand stitch it down. I'm going to use invisible stitch. I'm going to invisible stitch it round. You do whatever you like. One of the reasons I'm going to invisible stitch it, like hand stitch it down, is because I don't have a very well matching thread because we're in quarantine, and it's going to like show a lot more. So, and I haven't done any top stitching on the rest of the garment. So that's why I'm going to do that. So I will see you when I have finished that. Right, so I hand stitched that collar down. This is the inside, and I hand stitched that facing down. So this is the right side. You can't see anything, which is good. Right, let's get back to those side seams. It's been a while. You thought I forgot, right? So here they are. So what we're going to do is we're going to press these side seams open. So press the side seams open and then continue pressing all the way down to the bottom of the hem. You'll notice there's a notch in this mitered bit, which should correspond with your facing allowance here on the side seam, which is 2 inches. Same on the other side. You'll notice the front is shorter than the back. That is on purpose. Okay, now obviously we're not going to have a raw edge here. So we're just going to fold this under by, I don't know, a centimetre. fold that under neatly. Okay, and we're going to fold this hem, oops, sorry. I'm going to fold this bottom hem up by 1 centimeter, the same amount that you folded this side edge in. So we're going to do that first. The other thing you can do while you're at the pressing station is press your armhole sleeve. So normally in a shirt you would have the seam allowance pressed towards the sleeve, but in this shirt actually we have it pressed towards the body, and that's because under the arm we've pressed the seam open, and so we're just going to continue that all the way around, so pressed in towards the body. If that is going to like disturb you, you could give it a bit of a clip here and then flip it out to the outside, but I don't worry about that. Or if you just don't press it open all the way, it's up to you. So I'm going to go ahead and do all that pressing and come and show you how to sew the miters. So you'll do so the back hem and the front hems all up 1 centimeter, and those side splits open. Right, so the next step is we're going to sew the miters. So you've noticed there's the already diagonal, I don't know, cut shape. So this is the wrong side of the garment, so we're going to fold it right sides together. There's that notch there in the middle, so you're going to fold it at the notch and fold it back on itself. So I'm opening out that split facing that we already sewed, and I'm keeping these little 1 centimeter folds that I folded back. I'm keeping those in there, and we're going to sew just 1 centimeter along here. Right there. So you're going to do that on all 4 of your mitered corners. I'm going to show you what I did earlier. So here it is. I sewed my 1 centimeter. I'm going to just give this corner just a little bit of a clip there. I'm going to do my turning trick. So opening at the seam, flipping it through, and then breaking all the rules and gently pushing that corner out. So what that's done is this. You can see that nice mitered corner. Need to repress that facing. That's okay, not a big deal. So I've got the shirt side seam open. Very awkward trying to iron on camera with the camera between you and the iron. So I'm just pressing that into place. And then I can go ahead, this is the front here. So this is that facing there. I'm just gonna cut away some of this extra, but don't cut all the way to here because that'll be showing in your hem. Just cut just a bit. Then I'm gonna turn the front facing through. So here's my hem, my front hem, and I'm going to press that. There we go. So I'm going to do that all the way around. Now, I designed this shirt to be top stitched, but like I said, I've got my quarantine thread issue. So I'm actually going to hand hem all of the hems up. But it's got a nice deep hem, and it actually will look really nice if you top stitch that hem down. I'm going to hem this by hand, and then I'll come back and I'll show you the results. Right. So I've hand stitched that hem up. You can see there's that mitre here that we made. It looks pretty nice. The pattern is designed, as I mentioned, to actually top stitch that down. So if I were going to top stitch it, here's what I would do. I would actually top stitch from the inside. And I would begin at the top here, following that serging line all the way down to here. Pivot across here, follow the hem, pivot up the slit facing, go straight across, go straight across here, pivot down this facing and do the hem, and do it all in one shot. So from basically neck, like the top of the neck, like the shoulder to the shoulder, in one pass. So yeah, that's what I would do. I'm now going to show you how to do the cuff. So here's our cuff, and I've interfaced half of it with just a lightweight interfacing. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to fold this bottom edge up 1 centimeter and press it. This is the edge that is interfaced, which is then going to be the edge that's facing the world, like the outside. I'm then going to fold it in half, right sides together, along that line, and I'm going to stitch it down here, 1 centimeter seam allowance here, and then down on this side, 1 centimeter seam allowance. Here's one I've already done. So I'm going to turn it through. So I'm just going to clip this corner off here and there. Setting my finger in like this, flipping it through. See me break the rules so much. Okay. Now I'm going to go and press this down. Basically the same procedure that you do for like a collar or something like that, and there's two like schools of thought. You can either top stitch it down on the right side, or you can top stitch it down on the wrong side. It's up to you. I like to do it so that you top stitch it down on the right side so that you can get like a really perfect finish there, and you don't have to worry about like catching that edge. Anyway, that's what I do. You can do it the opposite way if that suits you better. Okay, so I have my cuff ready to go. Here's my sleeve. If you remember, we did some stay stitching. I'm just clipping off this extra long bits of the placket. So I'm going to pin from the inside. So I'm pinning the long edge, like the edge that we didn't press, to the inside here. So I'm matching this edge. This is the folded under edge of the placket. I'm just pinning it onto the inside of that cuff. Here's that placket. This placket's going to be open. So just ensure with your placket one side's folded back and the other side is not. Okay. So I'm going to go and I'm going to sew that with a 1 centimeter seam allowance. Okay. And then I'm going to come back and show you what to do next. Okay, so I've sewn the cuff on. Ooh, lots of threads to cut. So now what you're going to do is you're going to tuck all of the seam allowance up into the cuff. I'm just going to clip this back a bit, it's a bit bulky. Okay, so you're going to press it all up inside here. And then you can top stitch that down. I'm going to hand sew it down. I'm in the hand sewing zone at the moment. I'm going to hand sew that down. And then all you need to do is buttons and buttonholes for the shirt. So do a button and buttonhole here. On the front, when I mark it, I mark my buttonholes on the inside. That's because my sewing machine likes to do buttonholes. It likes the wrong side, like the lower side, to be the right side of the buttonhole. So your buttonholes are going to go in line with this center front here. So the template will be in the pattern, but just so you know, I do the top buttonhole horizontal and all of the other ones are going to be vertical, but they're all going to run along this center front line down here. So I hope this sew along has been helpful for you and that you enjoy wearing the shirt.